All About English, Lesson 14. Top 5 Tips for Avoiding Common Mistakes in English.
In this lesson, we're going to give you some tips on how to avoid common mistakes made by learners of English. This is so that you can be aware of certain errors and keep them in mind when you learn.
Now, there are some common English errors made by people with the same language background, but in this lesson, we'll try to touch upon very general points.
Okay, so number 1, watch your spelling.
One thing you should be careful about is your spelling. When writing something in English, a single spelling error could ruin the whole piece of writing.
English words are tricky in the sense that the spelling doesn't always match the way we pronounce a word. Be sure to use the spell checker on your computer, and even then double check with your eyes for any heterograph errors, which are words that sound the same but have different meanings and different spellings.
Good point. Also, be careful with American spelling and British spelling. Stick to one.
Now, on to number 2. What is it, Chihiro?
Tip number 2 is to watch your language.
Although English is relatively casual compared to languages that have levels of formality, you still have to choose your words according to the company you find yourself in.
Words that are most likely safe to use are from newspapers or words from the news on TV. Keep political correctness in mind as well. In other words, be sure not to use terms that may offend certain groups of people. For example, the word stewardess has been replaced by flight attendant. It's better to stay safe and watch your language. Ryan, give us number 3.
Tip number 3 is watch your nouns.
Nouns are easy when you learn them. They seem pretty straightforward, but some of them may be tricky.
We can divide nouns into count and non-count nouns. We can make the count nouns plural by adding an s or es to the word, depending on the word. We generally don't make non-count nouns into plurals by adding an s. For example, we can pluralize the word song by adding an s, as in, that's his favorite song, or those are his favorite songs.
However, an s is not usually added to a word like music, and we usually say pieces of music or types of music as opposed to that is his favorite musics.
Good point. But since language changes over time, we cannot say this is a definite rule for all nouns all the time. Okay, coming in at number 4 is
know your vowels.
Vowels in English are tricky. There are 5 written vowels.
Depending on the combination with other vowels and consonants, the sound of the vowel may change. People with different accents may also pronounce the same vowel in a word differently, whether or not they speak it as a first or second language.
So, if you're coming from a language with flat vowels, this might be a tricky thing to catch. A good way to practice this is by shadowing native speakers and by better understanding the positioning of the tongue.
This way, you will not only become a clearer speaker yourself, but you will also be able to catch the sounds that you didn't hear before.
Okay, the last tip. Tip number 5.
Know that some differences are very different.
Many languages have speakers that speak with different accents, which, as mentioned before, is true also in English.
Yet speakers of English generally understand one another because, in the end, it is the same language.
However, once in a while, differences in vocabulary arise and an odd word comes along with a completely different meaning in one English than the other.
For example, in American English, we call the piece of clothing on the lower half of your body pants. Yet the same word in British English refers to your undergarment.
Another example is that the first floor in the United States is the ground floor, and it's often marked with a G in an elevator. Whereas in British English, it's marked with the number 1 to indicate it's the first floor.
Here's one last example, one that might cause embarrassment if you make a mistake. In American English, the tool you use for pencil mistakes is called an eraser.
In British English, this is called a rubber. However, rubber is slang for a condom in the United States.
So there you have it, everybody, some common mistakes that you want to avoid if you can. But of course, at the same time, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Making mistakes is important because you can always learn from them.